the 8th day already of June 2023. I hope everybody's doing good today. And I'm going to be your host, Dana Durnford. We got a 24-hour news cycle to get through tonight. Ridiculous amount of news as usual. Put all important stories in the first half and the next most important stories after that. We're just going to dive figuratively, of course, right in. But you can call at 709 or text me 589-4406. Numbers on your screen, 709-589-4406. I'm afraid that thing's lightning. That's not normal. What did I click now, I wonder? Should look like that. There we go. I'm afraid to do something now. Oh, that worked out. Okay. Let's get after it. We got a lot to get through. We got a poll. We're going to address that right away. Always takes me a minute or something like that to get caught up and everything. So the poll tonight is coming right up. Should the nuclear industry stop claiming Fukushima tanks contained all the water used on the meltdowns? And of course, this is the radioactive fallout after 27 days in your bottom left-hand corner. So the radiation can't all be in the tanks. And now the tanks, if you fill it up with the numbers that they're talking about, that we document, that we have playlists, sets of videos that we've covered this topic. And if you did fill up the tanks, you could never get near the tank again, and you couldn't build any other tanks, because the reactors are actually destroyed. That's the stump of reactor 3. That's the stump of reactor 4. They're actually pretending they're in the fuel pool at the very top of the buildings. They've done the same thing with that building there, reactor 3. So South Korea is protesting tritium, and they're growing fish right at the site, and they're calling it tritium water again. The only problem with this is it hasn't stopped hemorrhaging into the ocean for 12 years. It's never slowed down, not even a little tiny bit. It's a 100% cover-up story that they got running for 12 years. Now people are actually bought into it, invested into the false narrative so much that they're out protesting in the streets for something that's been going on for 12 years, thinking it's never happened, and it might happen. So it's a very convoluted, confusing story to anybody who's not initiated into the wonderful world of mass genocide known as nuclear. More United States Department of Energy funding for commercial fusion was announced today by the nuclear lobbyist group, Nuclear Engineering. And here's a list of the fusion companies that have no actual fusion reactors. They're 50 years away from it, or 100 years away from fruition. And they're having money heaped up on them. It'd be better to spend it on geothermal, I would imagine, because that actually exists. Within 5 to 10 years, they claim one of these is going to crack it. But they've been saying this for 60 years, 70 years or something, 80 years. It's just about stealing your future, not accomplishing nothing. The jobs are basically filled up with the traders in the nuclear industry. Their children got cushy jobs, not having to come up with solutions. Because that's what fusion is, right? You get all this money, but you haven't got to actually solve something. And everybody's going to sign memorandums of understandings that they're going to use technology that doesn't exist and is unlikely to exist, rather than geothermal, which is everywhere. The total funding of $46 million, which is a drop in the bucket. Department of Energy, which is also new scale, is Department of Energy, right? Disguised as a company. Parliament could scrap the Strategic Clean Tech Label in Net Zero Industry Act. This is the EU. They voted something, don't quote me, but it's like 560 to 515 to call nuclear green. It was absolutely outrageous that many people can get around. They didn't, right? This was lobbying groups. And they created this so-called taxonomy to promote green stuff, and they put in nuclear. And because people can now invest in nuclear and get a write-off, and it would have all kinds of shelters and tax breaks and everything else because it was under a green label when it has nothing to do with renewables or green. It's nuclear. It's the dirtiest thing in history. It's a threat to all species just from the emissions. A lawmaker for the European Parliament, People's Party rather, wants to scrap strategic label given to certain technologies under the Net Zero Industrial Act. And so, we're seeing this in the United States too, where they want to get rid of renewable label and call it clean energy because they already got that label for nuclear, despite the fact that it's not clean. But it's a neat way to slip in and take advantage of billions of dollars with no accountability for where the money goes. So they'll destroy your future and all the species' future so they can get a paycheck. It's unbelievable. They control the airwaves, they control the media, the universities, the regulatory agencies, the checks and balances. They're all controlled opposition. European Commission tabled its Net Zero Industry. Net Zero was a paper produced by Miles Allen. And it was just Miles, a single person, same as James Hansen's paper was a single person, which was global warming, right? And it was the same thing. In fact, carbon footprint was a advertisement campaign by BP Oil to blame you for a disaster. If you didn't want the oil, they wouldn't have had the accident, right? And so they had this big advertisement campaign worldwide in the medias and blamed you for wanting oil. That's why you had the big shipwrecks of oil tankers, because you wanted oil. But United Nations countries took that narrative, right, the net zero, Miles Allen, James Hansen's climate change, Brock with the global warming or whatever. Hang on a second. It's never easy. It's never going to be easy to be honest. There we go. Oh, lucky me. Sometimes. That one's supposed to be up there. We go. That's better. I don't know why that's over there for, but there we go. Hang on. The system's a little funny during the night. All right. So here's how the world works right currently. Back up. So you had Miles Allen, who now works for Oxford, I think. Nice cushy job in climate change department. The physicist behind net zero, he wrote a paper, and the United Nations loved it, and so they used that to bludgeon 195 countries worldwide. BP Oil done a large advertising campaign in 2005, and it was intended to divert attention from the fossil fuel industry onto the individual consumers. And so that's carbon, right? And then we had Proctor. I missed him. The father of global warming, Wallace Brocker. He wrote a paper on the global warming. Hansen wrote a paper on climate change. And there was two people on that paper. And this is 1988. And he gave a congressional testimony on climate change. And his testimony was pivotal. It was marked the official beginning of the global warming policy debate. And Hansen, we got him in all kinds of videos and all kinds of media promoting nuclear and saying it's like a banana and getting on an airplane and just unbelievable, disgusting lies. And so they used him, they used Wallace Brocker for global warming, they used Miles Allen for net zero, and BP Oil for carbon. And that's the four things they're attacking you on the planet, and they're driving taxes sky high, there's inflation everywhere. It's based on those four entities. Very, very, very dishonest four entities. And the United Nations is the military-industrial complex. And so they have a far reach, there's 195 militaries, and they're able to, because they control the media universities, they're able to perpetrate that list of deception and deceit upon the entire population that has access to media. Parliament could scrap back to the euro, to net zero. And it really bugs me when I hear the word, and so clean, strategic clean. So you want to get rid of renewables, call everything clean or unclean, right? And then that's the easier way to slip nuclear into it. The European Commission tabled its Net Zero Industry Act. The net zero is based upon a paper by a single person. And it's not even peer reviewed. And now everybody on the planet is being bludgeoned to death with it. The Industry Act in March 2023, in response to USA's $300 billion green tech subsidy program, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is meant to promote nuclear and keep current nuclear operating in long past its design life. And it has a design life because they're high-pressure reactors, and they're very vulnerable to gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardments, beta rays from the fuel. And it breaks down the integrity of the steel, which is under over 1,000 psi, pounds per square inch. And you can imagine a tire at 1,000 pounds per square inch exploding, how that's going to play out. The fuel immediately gets dispersed and then starts burning and melting down. However, as it's exploded as projectiles in the surrounding couple of kilometers, however, not at all net zero emission technologies made it into the list, with nuclear power in particular missing from the annexes to the Commission's proposal. And I'm not really sure what the frig they're up to outside of last year. They had a vote and they declared nuclear as green technology. But there was a lot of controversies. There was some countries that launched lawsuits to challenge those particular assertions that are still winding their way through the big entity that is let's keep it rolling because saying traditional nuclear power plants were not among the strategic technologies identified by Brussels. Now, we've covered this every step of the way, all the way the preamble to the vote, all the way up the vote, and then up to today. Iran makes a food pest control machine using irradiation. So they're going to irradiate, because people buy into that. We're irradiating your food to get rid of pests and get rid of certain, well, basically to get rid of pests, right? And to extend his life is what they say. But the only reason, here's how when you irradiate it, you're killing the bacteria and the fungus and the food itself, right? That would normally break down the food after a certain while. So the food is no longer food. You're probably getting more nutrition licking the stamp than you will from this food. It's not able to break down properly in your stomach, and now it's ionized. You're ionizing the food. Right? The beams they're using in order to do what they're claiming has to ionize the food too. But they consider it safe. And they being deliberate monsters with a legacy of being deliberate monsters. Very disappointing. And we're talking about like cereal, which is mostly for children, will eat the majority of it. The Subsidied Atomic Energy Organization. Like every time, no matter what country, when you hear the word atomic energy, these are guaranteed. Their whole legacy, it'd be easy to convict them of multiple crimes the minute they join that organization, because they have to have a lot of, in order to keep them in line, they got to be able to blackmail them, basically. Iran's radiation application development companies manufacture a 60 kilowatt industrial radiation system for pest control and agricultural and post-harvest treatments. The CEO of this monstrous corporation had said. And so the broad range of products, this is just a small fraction of it: cereals, grains, crops, medicinal herbs, radiating your medicine. They're not evil at all. They're way past that one. And dates and figs down in these countries is extremely important to the population's diet. So that's the best way to destroy a country, is wreck their food and their water. Fukushima took care of the water, most of the food. They're going to finish it out by utilizing it. And to increase shelf life, in order to do that, you got to kill all the good bacteria and the fungus and everything that's natural for the food. The microscopic animals that your stomach needs to work in harmony to break down the food. So then they justify by saying 60 countries worldwide have introduced the same regulations, allowing the use of radiation for food products like spices and grains and fruits and vegetables and meats and medicinal herbs. That freaks me out when I see stuff like that. Anyway, it's a sad day that another country is just going to do the work for the nuclear industry and poison people themselves, instead of nuclear industry having to figure out how to do it. Experts against Japan's nuclear wastewater discharge plant. Experts. Notice nobody ever quotes me. And who the hell knows this subject any better than me, I wonder? Really? Look, we cover this 5 days a week, week after week, month after month, year after year. We cover it all. We don't miss very much. It's pretty rare we miss anything. I never get quoted, never get interviews about it from the medias worldwide. You know, they can't debunk me. They can't, like, put me on and say, look, he doesn't even know what he's talking about. Didn't have experts ridicule me, because that's my job. I ridicule the experts. And so you're buying into this narrative first. You got to buy into the narrative that they haven't dumped anything into the ocean. How does that work? How does that actually work? I'll show you a picture of the most dangerous creature humanity has right now. It's called a journalist. The most lethal creature on the planet is a journalist. It's able to manipulate and worm its way in all facets of society and then destroy it so they can get a paycheck on Friday. This is a radioactive fallout model. This is backed up by actual studies on the other side. And this model is covering the planet with radiation in 16 days. 16 days of radiation. So how can it all be in the tanks when you cover the whole planet in 16 days? All the media does is to tell you it's like eating a banana, walking in the sunshine, flying on an airplane, blah, 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 blah. And this is 80 years of the same propaganda. That none of that has anything to do with nuclear. Can't make a dirty bomb out of a banana or sunshine. It's not rocket science, but the whole planet seems to be completely complacent. And that's because of this creature's right there. There was some dissenting voices, though. Specialist environmental radiological analyst is that the nuclear contaminated water discharged into the ocean contains not only radionuclides, but also other harmful elements. Mind-blowing. If you're an expert, surely you can do better than that. We don't know what the consequences will be or what will happen to the ocean. And so they're speaking in the future tense, right? But this has already happened. It's like that doesn't matter. Their job is just to lie to you. Honesty doesn't have a place at the table, ever, under any circumstances. This is TEPCO's numbers put into a model of plutonium-239. Well, like to say we don't know what the consequences will be. We don't know what's going to happen to the ocean. That's a completely dishonest. The information is available at my site for everybody free of charge. We went out and done multiple year after year research expeditions where we didn't come home for 4 or 5 months.
Well, we got to pick one up.
We're boots on the ground, day in, day out, in adverse conditions, year after year after year, doing research expeditions, studying the species, and we left no stone unturned. We've done from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 6 years. Now we're on the Atlantic for 3 years. And this is catastrophic. Fukushima was a catastrophic event. The species to your left are exterminated. To claim that that doesn't matter, that doesn't exist, is just mind-boggling. The species to your left are actually exterminated. That's pre-Fukushima nuclear meltdown to your left. And we have the studies, we have all kinds of documentation over the years backing up the fallout. But they refuse to acknowledge it. The only thing you see in the media is that Japan might dump it in the water, but they've never stopped dumping it in the water. And we've done the research expeditions year after year after year. And there's no mistaken, there's no way to misinterpret what I'm talking about. Let's get back to the stories here. So there's no way to say we don't know what the effects will be, is what I'm saying to you. It's completely dishonest to suggest that there's no way we're able to know. It's already happened, right? The reactors have melted down a very long time ago and blew up and caught fire and blew up. And we have endless fallout models. This model in the bottom right-hand corner is 19 days. This is the stump of Reactor 3. Reactor 3 does not look like that. And Reactor 4 on the right...
The report suggests that the
Reactor 4 on the right doesn't look... Bear with me, I screwed that up. All right, here we go again. So when they say we don't know the consequences, well, actually we do. And that we don't know what will happen to the ocean, we actually do. We've done the research expeditions year after year after year. The species never came back, which means we destroyed the integrity of the entire Pacific Ocean. That's what we're seeing in all the emaciated whales, emaciated birds, emaciated sea lions, and emaciated seals. Not because of bananas and potato chips, but because of unbelievable, hideous amount of radioactive fallout that is still ongoing today. And so nuclear doesn't have... so this picture here, where they claim they're growing water from the filtration system, the ELP system. I have multiple videos and playlists about the water system. I provide you all the documentation. 2-hour video after 2-hour videos after 2-hour videos after 2-hour videos of documentation. And yet nobody, and I mean nobody, there's nobody in the media worldwide will say, hey, there's this guy out there who's done a lot of research and he got a lot of documentation. Excuse me, my apologies. Get a little upset when I hear so much propaganda. So they're claiming the filtration system, that if you run this radioactive water through the filtration system at over 2 sieverts a liter, because they're pouring it right over the reactor core, they're only acknowledging beta, and 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. So if you put that into a filter for 10 minutes, you can't get near the filter again. You can never change the filter again. The filters are not 4 feet thick sheets of lead all around, so you can't change it. And you can't filter this stuff. You're talking about, you can put 2 million atoms, 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. You really think you can filter something like this? There's categorically no proof worldwide that you can filter. Again, see, tritium ingested by a fish can be excreted as tritiated water. And they're going on the assumptions that TEPCO has kept everything in the destroyed buildings. Nothing has got out of the buildings. And so reactor 1 explosion over there, reactor 3 explosion right here, reactor 2 and reactor 4 exploded too, but they hid those videos away. They actually have them. And they bring out the experts to talk about tritium, which is meant to perpetrate the lie. And we have no choice. And we're doing research on the East Coast. We're seeing the same devastation on the East Coast. This story was an interesting spin on propaganda. So Japan is targeted, and yeah, it's true, 100%, and so they should be. But Chinese, not propaganda, but if you use just the word as advertisement color propaganda, then it's propaganda. Covert online campaigns. Well, that really think Japan's not doing the exact same to lie to us? Because that's what they're doing. And I don't know why they're showing Americans on a plane, big military plane for it, but there's nothing in the description. The Chinese Communist Party is ramping up a multi-year propaganda covert social media campaign focused on Japan's plan. So it's about perpetrating that deception. Taiwan, South Korea, China, and Japan are working to enhance each other synergistically to hoodwink the planet. So they need a little bit of drama in there, and they keep the same stories consistent, the same propaganda consistent, and so you'll get people who don't know the narratives, and will come out and protest the tritium. They'll find people to speak on the tritium, and the majority of these have never been interviewed in their lives, and are very happy to get an interview. They feel really good about it. They don't understand the picture. And the picture is very clear. Like, if you're a nuclear anything and you see a picture like this, the building's not there no more, despite the fact that they claimed it was. So referencing an anonymous insider, which is all Japan does. Japan never gives you a source, by the way. And reporting that South Korea are opposed to the plan. Actually, when South Korea the only people to ever visit the plant, by the way, and nuclear experts in history in 12 years. As soon as they came out, the media asked them were they ready to lift the embargoes against food and seafood now that they went there and inspected it. And they were basically shaking their heads that they were. But they backed off because 80% of the Koreans are speaking out about it. So they're trying to smooth it down. And that's their words, not mine. They're trying to smooth it down. They're not trying to come up with solutions or find facts. They're just trying to calm down. Because South Korea wants to have a nuclear renaissance with this current administration. The last administration was vehemently anti-nuclear. This administration is pro-nuclear, but they're so far behind because there's a lot of damage done by the previous administration to shut down nuclear. They reversed it, but they don't have the manpower anymore. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the supply chain to build reactors anymore. But they're going to try. That's the version, right? And the president of the country, as soon as he was elected, went right to a nuclear plant and had his picture taken and promoted nuclear. And the very next day or that day, I can't remember, we covered it. It was really, really, desperate pandering to an industry is what we took away from it. Tough day today. Been a tough week. We got bad weather all the way into next week. And then the winds are supposed to change from the west. It's going to take a day or two to bring the seas back down. And then we should be able to get back on the ocean, hopefully. Should nuclear industry stop claiming Fukushima tanks contains all the water used on the meltdowns? Because that's what they're doing. They're claiming all the radiation, all the water. Now, the reactors would normally need 4,500 tons. But remember, you can't put that back in the reactors. You're not spraying water over that. And you can't filter it. And we have entire presentations showing you the Siri system, the Uriva system, the ELP systems. The tanks were all built in 2013 and the first part of 2014. And we counted the tanks, by the way. We only got 750 if you include the little ones. The first 5 months of 2023, Chinese diplomat and state media tweeted about it more than 300 times, surpassing total mentions in 2022. So you're tracking that stuff. Wow. Nuclear wasteland, hundreds of abandoned vintage cars, including Porsches, Jaguars, found inside of the Fukushima exclusion zones. So this was another so-called urban explorer. Abandoned vintage cars. There's more than that there. They're too radioactive. Now, there are criminal organizations shipping stuff out of there, but a lot of it is not shippable. If irradiated Fukushima water is so safe, why don't the Japanese bureaucrats drink it? Swim in it. Again, right? They don't understand the big picture, because you wouldn't make that narrative. Japan has faked every facet of the water controls, every single facet of it. Hang on. I said it enough, now I got to show it, otherwise I'm a liar. He's a liar. Why didn't he show it to you? Because he's lying. They'll do anything just to persuade a single person. There's so many public relation firms, they got no one to pick on. They got me mauled for 12 years. This is easy, but it's still what it is. Oops. Oopsie daisy. Here we go. Short version. Let's do the short version. Almost like the long version, but it's short. TEPCO, this is 2014 in August, 3.5 years later, there was a system known as the Arriva system. So TEPCO abandoned that. It wasn't used, it kept out of operation, period. 3.5 years. The same as the so-called ELPS, which is this system, 2014, was unused. The groundwater bypass operation didn't work. The ice wall didn't work. The fence didn't work, rather. The ice wall didn't work. And they admit, they're just flying over a large section, which is the nuclear wasteland they got, they admit to, is not in the tanks. You know what I mean? Even at 1 sievert per hour per liter, TEPCO done nothing for 2 years to stop the radioactive water. And they use the word leak. And it blows my mind when you're looking through nuclear, for every accident you'll hear the word leak only. 1,000 years from now, contaminated water from Fukushima will still be entering the Pacific Ocean. 1,000 years from then. TEPCO plans to dump the water stored at Fukushima Daiichi into the Pacific. The plans are already enormous amounts of highly contaminated water directly into the ocean from a plethora of leaks from the reactor buildings. After the water's passed through the crippled unit, which you've seen the pictures of it, it's processed through the series system. But the system was overwhelmed by the complexity and concentrations, the radioactivity, and couldn't be used. So the series system didn't work, the Arriva system didn't work, the ELP system didn't work. There is no filtration. Everything is out of control. France says Japan has lost control. The French should leave the country. The Swiss told their citizens to get out of the country. The energy official says Tokyo's lost all control. This could one day be considered the start of the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet. Does it sound like everything is in the tanks to anybody? And even back then, South Korea called Fukushima's handling incompetent. Now they're saying that they're competent. Not two-faced at all, are they? If you irradiated Fukushima water, that has been dumped into the ocean. So the idea is to get you to fight, get you arguing about tritium and what might happen instead of what's been happening for 12 years straight. Because there's a lot of stories about that today. And I can't talk about those stories because they're only acknowledging and not even in an elusive way of tritium. So you can't have a so they got a lot of these are activists that are down at Japan's embassy protesting, and the police are there to stop them. That's a water cooler dressed up as a Fukushima water tank, right? But the reality of it is that you're missing the big picture that's been going on for 12 years, the constant releases, and the fact that the oceans were contaminated on the entire planet in 19 days, which is this model right there. Right, because, it's not in the tanks because it detonated. You're not pouring water over something that's not in the building no more, for starters. Well, the water they're claiming they're using is 130 tons a day, which is a garden hose. So they're using a garden hose and multiple melter reactors and 8 fuel pools. So you got to split a garden hose 4 ways. Right, so each stream for each reactor building is less than the size of your pinky. That's what they're talking about. Is 130. A garden hose is 140 tons a day, at 30 psi. But I don't matter, right? They just got to keep regurgitating that narrative for the next 200 years or something, because that's how long. It's going to take at least that long to decommission that site. Unless you run out of the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language. And so South Korea has multiple opposition parties. Hello? Hang on there. Hello?
How you doing, Dana? I got a question.
You're live, you know that, right?
Yep, hi, it's Willie. I got a question.
Go ahead.
What about this smoke? And what about these fires? Because I'm right now, I've been freaking out because I'm in the midst of this smoky fire hell in New Jersey. And I'm wondering what it's like as far as
radiation.
How contaminated were these trees? How much
incredible.
radiation?
It's a BC fire. So it's heavy radioactive fallout. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My question is on how much radioactive material in these trees. What's this smoke really going to do to? What effect is going to have on cancer over the next? When we see a big spike, what's going to happen?
Okay.
Are people going to start getting sick real quick?
Yeah. Well, there's 1,800 diseases and illnesses, not autoimmune deficiencies and injuries from radiation, right? So it's not just cancer. And you will see statistical increases in leukemia and Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes and Down syndrome. And in 9 months' time, you'll see a huge increase in Down syndrome from babies being born. And long-term, well, because those forests are the West Coast, they sequestered absurd amount of radiation after Fukushima continuously, and a lot of it, well, right to the point where the reason you're having the fires is because of Fukushima. It killed the bacteria, the fungus in the forest is the same as we've seen around Chernobyl. And now, so the forests are not soaking up water anymore because you don't have the bacteria and the fungus, so the foliage the litter doesn't break down. And so that's being, you got
They
this.
didn't have any rains. They didn't have any rain.
They had a little bit, but it doesn't, it runs off down to the coastline because the earth is so dry, because Fukushima's fallout is full body X-rays throughout the forest, right? So it wiped
So
out
this
the...
giant plume covers all the way down to Florida almost now.
Yeah, I was looking at it.
They're pulling this stuff. They're using weather weapons to pull this stuff in from the north and bring it directly down south.
I was actually looking at it in New York today.
It's a big washing machine. They're going round and round. They're using the AI system with the 5G and the weather modification to pull this shit down. It's a stationary. It's impossible what's happening, but they're pulling it. They're doing it with fucking high power, man. They're using a lot of fucking power to do this. There's no fucking way that they can be changing the entire jet stream to pull it to just stay right where it is and pull this fucking shit right down into the as far as Florida. Impossible.
I don't know. Well, I do know that it's all covered in radioactive smoke as we speak, right? And it's going to be a long time before that is able to clear it, and we don't. And it's because it's still burning out of control. This is a rough ride. This is serious contamination and particulates on top of that, right? So if you got air exchangers, you got to clean those filters twice a day. Just wash those particular ones out anyway to try to. Yeah, no, I don't know. But anyway,
all right.
Thank you. You take care.
All right.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. That the forests on the west coast that are burning are radioactive forests, and the forest sucks up the radiation big time, and distributes to the tips of the trees, and so the forest fire, even if the whole tree doesn't burn, the tips will burn. And you can't destroy radiation by burning it. You're just going to liberate it into the environment. Rival parties swap Fukushima committee. This is South Korea. And this is so there's some controversies that the ruling party had hired a lot of their own kids for certain cushy jobs. And that the opposition, let's run through it. The rival People's Power Party and the Democratic Party have given in to each other's demands by reaching agreement. So they're basically going to cover each other's crimes up, by the sounds of it. Two major controversial issues, the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant and the elections. The two parties announced they will convene a special committee to review the releases of the radioactive water. So they bought into the narrative that nothing has escaped. Right? That's what they're claiming. So they're going to perpetrate that narrative even more, because South Korea, about 80% of South Korea is protesting it. So the reactors actually blew up. The radioactive fallout covered the whole planet in 19 days, and the Pacific Ocean was covered in radiation in less than that. So was the Atlantic and the rest of them, right? But originally they were saying it was going to take 7 years for the radiation to go across the ocean. The corrosive currents will do it in about 30 days. The jet stream done it in just a couple of days. And so you can see up there 180 hours, right? You see over there 324 hours, but 468 hours is 19.5 days. And so their idea is to keep that narrative, like they're working together. So you got South Korea, China, Taiwan, and scumbag Japan all working together to keep that lie going. Concerns over Fukushima Water Grow is fish with cesium, 18,000 becquerels a kilogram for rockfish, and something less for trout. And this picture's been circulating for about 2 months, And 90% of the stories will use this particular picture, despite the fact there's around 5,000 pictures available. I have them all. When you count the tanks in this picture, you end up, if you count the small tanks, and let me change so I can show you where that's to. Here we go. So small tanks, oh, I'm not there, am I? The small tanks, just give me a second, I'll wind them up for you. Are these tanks here? There's around 300 of them, and there's small ones behind it too. But it's not a great picture there. But let me back up and look a bit better for you, right? So that's set there, that's small tanks. If you include them, there's around 750 tanks, is being generous. Not even 1,000 tanks. And a lot of them tanks are also, and there's another bunch like those small ones further up there. So if you include everything, you still only end up with 750. Again, with Japan set to release the radioactive water from the crippled, where the buildings actually were, sorry. Did I screw that up? I wonder. There we go. So this study was from France. So they're not going to release it. It's already been released. So this was the French government's IRSN, Radiation Protection Agency in France, was shown of cesium-137 after 7 days. This model is just 7 days. Is 1 million to 10 million times what they call weapons fallout, residual cesium-137, because the radiation gets sucked up by plants and trees and streams and everything else, right? But that's France's model of 1 million to 10 million times on the West Coast. They also have another model, and this model is based on 30 days. I'm going to stop it right here. And this is day 20, right here, the 31st. That's day 20. That's 20 days of radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. And they're trying to convince you that that didn't happen, but they might dump some in the ocean from tanks. And don't worry, though, it's only tritium. That's the scam, right? And all the media, all the universities, all the regulatory agencies, all the political parties are going to pretend that it might happen. Not what's already happened, but what might happen. And there's been a big effort to perpetrate that lie upon you. And here's another one. Fukushima, same picture. Fallout from Fukushima radioactive wastewater. So they're gonna buy into the narrative. This is how they're creating the divide, because people, well, no, it's gonna happen. It hasn't happened yet, Dan. It's gonna happen. Well, like, I have the evidence I provided. I have multiple presentations specifically on the tanks, by the way, and then presentations on the bags. They picked up 30 million one-ton bags in just that part of the country. Try wrapping your mind around that. If you put a bag in the back of a one-ton pickup truck, 30 million of them, that's 30 million one-ton pickup trucks. That's 5 rows of traffic, bumper to bumper, wrapped around the entire planet. Quoting a diplomatic source, the report says President vowed to make an all-out effort to remove public concerns in Korea. Do you get it? All-out effort to stop people from worrying. Right? Do you get what's going on? So South Korea is announcing that they're going to stop people from worrying, whatever it takes. They're going to tell them whatever law it takes to get people to give up being concerned, because 80% of the population is concerned, but they're concerned about the fake one. And this is on purpose. And this is meant to cause the controversy, too. Now, he's also pro-nuclear, and he announced when he got elected last year that there was going to be a nuclear renaissance for South Korea, and they're going to build reactors everywhere, and the world's going to be one great big Jetson happy family. And to help convince skeptics to have a willing neighbor, like, this is madness. And to help convince skeptics. So they've got a decision made without the investigations. And then the investigations, of course, they never brought no samples back. The administration's purported stance is further proof that their president is bent on fence mending with an unrepentant government at whatever cost. Many Koreas were caught off guard. So the idea is to create the divide and conquer, right? Keep the propaganda let's keep her going here. We'll never get through it. It was 4 reactors melted down and 8 fuel pools. 2 fuel pools at the top of each building. And began pumping in seawater to cool the melted fuel. 12 years later, the cooling process still goes on, emitting radiation, producing over 130 tons of contaminated wastewater daily. 130 tons is a garden hose, a 3/8 garden hose. It's actually 140 tons with a 30 psi on it. And so we go all the way back, right, to the accident, and we can clobber any of their deceit, but the population is not going to hear that because I'm censored into non-existence. And it's up to the people, it's up to the world that do know I exist to get me out there. I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing my job on my end. And I've gone above and beyond. You know, all the research expeditions have taken their toll, right? Hong Kong to restrict food imports if Japan releases the tritiated wastewater into the environment. So this helps perpetrate this is what I mean. They're working with each other to push out now, and eventually Japan is probably going to say, okay, you win. We're not going to put it in the ocean. We'll store it on land. And the world will rejoice to save the world and the oceans from being polluted by tritium, when the oceans haven't stopped being polluted by uranium, plutonium, curium, americium, neptunium, nonstop for 12 years, and it'll go on for thousands. That's what they're probably up to, is my take on this, because that makes sense. Because they have to be working to some purpose. Get everybody roiled up. Where are they getting everybody roiled up, see? That's the confusing part. They're purposely trying to create this blowback for tritiated water so that people think that's all there, and then the likely outcome is they're going to say, well, okay, you win, we're not going to dump it into the ocean. And then nuclear then kind of gets their renaissance back too, right? If they can pull it off. I think they can pull it off, but I don't think they'll get the renaissance back because we affected the policymakers and the investors too much over the years. Because those types of people will find us, and once they see a little bit of this, all of a sudden they're going to get the bigger picture. Because you ain't going to get the picture from the media, that's for sure. There's nowhere else to get it, which is horrifying. So I failed on that. That's the idea of what I'd done, continue to do, was educate the population. And then you would have 1,000 people like me out there articulating the issue, right? And that didn't happen. And so I'm stuck here like perpetual misery constantly, doing the best I can with my the censorship because they're planning on. The last thing they need is me getting any traction, right? So they can't have that. And you got 1,000 public relation firms to make sure I don't get traction. And so the average person would have gave up, is basically, I guess, what I'm trying to say. I'm not. I don't have that in my DNA, right? I got no issues with slugging it out for decades. Because I'm only trying to convince the policymakers. I'm not trying to convince the population. And I can guarantee you I can convince the policymakers. Because they've been hoodwinked too. Hong Kong will take rigorous measures to restrict food imports from Japan if they dump the tritium into the ocean. It's preposterous but that's plays right into what they're up to. Never underestimate propaganda. Duke Energy and county officials to test sirens around the Brunswick disease factory, also known as a nuclear power plant. I don't like when they don't tell me how many sirens they got. And I forgot to look it up, and I apologize. Didn't we cover that recently last year? Wasn't it like 160 sirens or something? And that was really interesting. Outdoors. Really? You got big sirens indoors somewhere? Can you imagine one of those sirens indoors going off? So what you got is like over 100 sirens anyway, within a 10-mile radius. They're up high on big poles. You couldn't walk past one of these without busting an eardrum, right? They're going to be 160 decibels or higher. A quantum of solace. Resolving a mathematical puzzle in quarks and gluons in nuclear matter. Like the only person's opinion that matters in this narrative is Edward Witten. He's really the rest, the rest of them are entertaining, but Edward Witten is really the only person he's the authority on all of this. And like I say, I doubt if he even has a driver's license. He's a functional autism savant, basically. Scientists have taken a significant step forward in the study of the properties of the quarks and the gluons. And they can't prove any of this, by the way. And that's what the controversy is all about, by the way. So they're going on the assumptions that Einstein's equation is right or not right. So they got to look at both sides of it. And the minute you put MIT into this, they got 90 years of promoting nuclear. And they're what we call schools of mass destructions at the University of Washington, MIT's, because the nuclear industry can't survive without their perpetual help, right? So they're actually schools of mass destructions, and they're pro-genocide machines, basically. The quarks and gluon plasma were identical in one method. The method mistakenly suggested the two properties of quark and gluon plasmas were identical. But again, unless it comes from Edward Witten, I'm really not going to give it much credibility. And so you can look at the string theory, you can look at the particle theory, you can look at the absurdness, really. And I got a clip there of Edwin Witten, but I didn't chop it up yet, so I'm not going to try to. I'm not going to try to. Let me see here. Your dark matter, string theory, quantum physics. And the big problem with this equation is that the industry will take it and turn it into a weapon of some type. And so the less information that they end up with, the better the world is and the 8 million species. One particular choice called, there's parts missing. So they spent years looking for consistent results. And does the particles, do they repeat themselves consistently with the experiments, right? And there's some discrepancy. So therefore, the gluons are the particles that carry the strong force. You got Fukushima melting down. You got Hanford up there needs another $700 billion minimum to try to mitigate it. You can't fix it, to mitigate it. And you're looking at 300 years for Donneray reprocessing site to be mitigated. You got all this dumped into the ocean that is guaranteed to destroy the future of all the other species. And all these academics and scientists working on fusion, working on particle physics and stuff like this, they could actually solve a lot of our current problems. They could fix, like if they went out and resolved geothermal, right? And so you can drill it, you come up with the technique to drill, and drilling, you would drill so deep, but then you would use lasers of some type to dissolve the rocks because they're hot and it's hard to drill into them, right? Once you get down a few miles. And then you can just tap into it. That's no commodities. It doesn't need any storage. It's geothermal. And, megawatts and gigawatts, it's half the price of nuclear, but you can have it up and running on the drop of a hat if you put a few universities to work on it. But we take the nuclear industry, like the particles and, nuclear subject itself has been studied in all the other natural particles combined by orders of magnitudes. So it tells you who controls the universities, basically. Australia's mining giant is calling for the federal government to restrictions on nuclear power. Well, first off, they're shipping uranium all over the world. Why is it so necessary to have it in their own country? So the Mineral Council, and we've covered them a lot over the last years, of Australia, they do this regularly where they'll come out and promote nuclear. And so the TV Sky News has, one of their hosts is going to be promoting nuclear today, Chris Kinney, Sky News host. And they're going to be promoting nuclear, big pushes the Prime Minister to remove nuclear prohibitions. So you want to change the legislation so that a corporation can make a few extra bucks. The reason there's no nuclear power in Australia, Chris, is because the people that enacted that law, right, in the legislation of Australia, recognize that they're just big, stupid disease factories. So it's ridiculous that a corporation, when corporations out of control, when it starts to try to tell you that you have to change legislation so they can make a few bucks. And that jeopardizes the entire population. And so he's from the media. His job is to push the narrative. China's doing it. Britain is doing it. No, well, first off, Britain's doing jack shit. Right? It's, Hinkley Point is around 43 billion US at this stage. It's far from finished. It's going to need 7 million liters of water a minute. It's using up enough cement to build a sidewalk all the way to Rome. The steel in it, I don't even know how to describe it. The resource is the biggest construction in history. And they're calling it carbon-free for some reason. And I explained carbon and net zero, and global warming and climate change, who wrote those papers earlier for everybody. I'm not going to do that to you again. So he was all happy. So this little clip here was about promoting his show that night with the mineral joint. And so corporations used to have a charter, and a charter dictated how big they can get, where they were going to be set up, and stuff like that. And if they broke the law, or if they committed crimes against the environment, they could be arrested and put into jail, and that their companies could be liquidated to pay restitution, outstanding debt, and the money left over could be used for rehabilitation of the contaminated lands or whatever, right? But then they piggybacked in on the slavery laws, which gave corporations illegal access to certain human rights, and which is known as corporate personhood. And Justice Hugo Black, a Supreme Court's justice in the United States in the 40s, had wrote an eloquent dissent stating how absurd it was that a law meant to free slaves from an oppressive government, the slavery law, was now piggybacking into corporations, and they were using it to take away the sovereignty and freedoms of a sovereign people. Right? And because, like, you can't put Mark Zuckerberg in jail, for instance, right? You can't put Elon Musk in jail because these corporations are shareholders. You can't put the shareholders in jail. So all you can do is give them a fine. Because they don't pay state, federal, local taxes, that money is kept in offshore accounts. So that's a betrayal right on its own. And then if they get a fine, they'll take some of the money that they should have paid in taxes and to pay, and there's basically a kickback. Every once in a while they catch them. Now they'll still commit those crimes in other countries. It's just illegal in the country they got caught. But nobody goes to jail. So there's no incentive not to be evil. Because they get a big fine, like $500 million, but they make $20 billion profit. Well, that's just good business. They didn't pay any taxes, so they shouldn't even really exist. And they would have paid taxes under the normal charters, but because they piggybacked on their illegal amendment to the American Constitution to free the slaves from an oppressive government, they utilized that with illegal amendments with corporate lawyers. That should be, revoked. That has to be revoked at some point in the future. Hopefully, humanity comes to a senses and revokes it. Let me see there. Let me explain it by talking about Canada's Pickering nuclear power plant for a second. I done a whole presentation on that, by the way, like 3-hour show. It's hard for me to find stuff sometimes, so. Don't worry about it. Tritium hazard report from Canada. Pickering was releasing 480,000 trillion becquerels a year. It's got a 120-year life or something like that, 12-year half-life, I believe. And the intake for the fresh water for millions of people is right alongside their outtake. Now, this is airborne and liquid. Unbelievably, this is one great big stupid disease factory, basically. There's no checks and balances. They store the fuel rods on the site The fuel rods are still splitting the atoms into the environment. The fuel pools are boiling off about 120,000 liters a day of uranium and plutonium and americium and neptunium and strontium, right alongside of millions and millions of people. And there's 1,800 diseases. There's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. There's endless diseases, and the more you get in you. Now, if you look at Sizewell, it only releases 8 trillion a year into the environment. Pickering releases 480,000 trillion becquerels a year, pulsing energy every second, almost at the speed of light of a beta ray. Barnon wins a major U.S. contract to clean up nuclear waste. They're so happy. This is a UK company. And this is at Hanford. Just in the 40s and 50s, Hanford dumped 450 billion gallons directly into the soil of legacy liquid nuclear waste, is how they describe it. And this was during the Manhattan Project, leading up to it and during it, right? So this is an ungodly by the leader stuff. And it's the equivalent of having a 6-foot wide aquarium, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet, dumped into the soil that runs right into the Columbia River, that feeds tens of thousands of farms from that aquifer downstream. And ultimately goes through millions of people's backyards and water intakes, and then into the Great Pacific Ocean in Puget Sound, right? And the tide exchange there is a huge tide exchange there, so that whistles it out into the Juan de Fuca Straits and places like that. It's crazy. That's some kind of crazy, that's what that is. These scientists have achieved a record-breaking temperature inside a tokamak. This is the stupidest thing imaginable. Again, it's fusion. And fusion is all about putting all your hopes and dreams in one basket. So instead of doing geothermal, which exists, is extremely quick to set up, has no adverse side effects, doesn't need any gas, oil, coal, or nuclear to run it. Gets no love at all. And the pipe dream, the fable, the lie, and something that is ridiculous, really. You're going to get 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures. You're going to contain it in a magnetic field, because if it touches anything, it's going to detonate. Then they can shut it down in a few seconds, yeah, but it detonates in a billionth of a second or a millionth of a second. So 3 seconds is lots. 3 seconds is like 3 million chances for it to go bang. And what do you think is going to happen? That 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperature, if it touches something, it's going to detonate. That's the problem, see? But oh no, they're going to, eventually, somewhere in the next couple of million years, they're going to figure out how to contain that in a magnetic field, because that's a paper from 1904. Because they got no one in there to come up with their own ideas, except for Whitten. And he's too busy. I don't even know if he left that university. I think he went there as a kid and he never left it. We confuse progress in fusion research, the potential for a sustainable clean energy. Like, you can't call something that uses up all the precious metals on the entire planet clean energy. And you can't call it promising when you're talking about insignificant so-called breakthroughs. These are not breakthroughs. This is just posturing to try to raise funds. And the Department of Energy is just will give you money anyway, as long as you're... Because they want this for space travel. They want this for weapons. They don't want this for energy. It's absurd to suggest this is for energy. It's ridiculous to suggest it. Oh, and They got a new directed energy to deal with drones. So they got this directed energy weapon. I think they're like $20 billion a pop or something. 18 million rather. I'm sorry. It's called Thor. Because kids like those cartoons and videos about Thor. And knows the military. Wherever the military sets up a base, there's usually child prostitution gets set up immediately. In order to fill up the child prostitution houses, they kidnap lots of children from around that part of the country. That's the typical, where like when Australia set up a base, their little girls went missing all over Australia right away. So now that we have drone clusters where they can send 1 million drones at you with weapons on each of them, that's pretty powerful. So, you know, they're kamikaze drones. They're the real thing, right? And they don't have, you know, you're not going to kill somebody that's in the seat. There's nobody in the seat. So they can sacrifice 100,000 to get you. They're going to get you, right? So imagine, you know, a leader of a country, you want to take him out, you send in 1 million drones. Well, Thor is not going to stop it. But a whole fleet of them would. That's what these are directed energy weapons. So everything in the distance, all the insects, birds and animals, everything is gonna get. Like they were using this on protesters, say 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And if you had a ring on your finger or steel buttons, stuff like that, you would literally strip off your clothing to get away from the pain caused by this. If you had like fillings or earrings or nose rings, you were in real trouble. If you had a chain around your neck, you had to tear that off your neck. If you had pins in your knees, or you were in real trouble. And they used it a couple of years ago extensively in Australia against protesters for the scamdemic, right? Where there had like hundreds of people being burnt with this thing. It's the same thing. It's the same. It's just on a different frequency. It's less expensive using surface-to-air weapons. And it never stops around here. A continuous firing of the system during the swarm engagement. It was extremely efficient, they say. Yeah, you're welcome. Tweet. Yeah, COVID killed off the starfish. I got to try to remember to use that. James said something like that before, and it cracks me up. This new high-tech pen paints healing gel straight in the wounds. I just wanted to put that out there because how come we don't all have one of those in the bathroom, in the medicine cabinet, right? And you get less scarring, and you can be sure some parts of the government got it a long time ago. Like, you know, touch screens, right? Pretty common right now. I got a friend of mine, let me see, 42 years ago or something. And they were using touchscreens for about 20 years before anybody in the public even knew what it was. And that's what I mean. Like, this stuff exists, and then it gets deactivated or whatever for secrecy. And then it's like when Bill Clinton in '96 took the restrictions off lasers, and they showed up in CDs and laser pens and levels and all kinds of equipment, right? There's actually a whole industry showed up based on lasers, particularly in computers. It revolutionized computer industry, right? Because you can do the binary ones and O's much more effectively, basically. The PAINT is an acronym for portable. So they take all the popular words and turn them into acronyms. They don't have to, but they do that because they're scum. A 3D printing pen that contains a sodium gel particles that will basically work as vessels for you. And are naturally produced by white blood cells and play a significant role in reducing inflammation and forming new blood vessels at injury sites. And that would be pretty amazing. But there'll always be something, right? They'll find some way to screw this up if it does get released into the population. They'll have some GMO into it or something. Nedbank Defense Gas Finance, this is South Africa. It says nuclear and coal would be worse. Yeah, well, nuclear is definitely going to be... There's nothing wrong with coal. Coal emissions don't go very far airborne, right? And they got you hoodwinked. Nuclear is global warming. The emissions from a nuclear power plant and for nuclear bomb testing, nuclear dumping, nuclear holding sites, but particularly fuel pools. There's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide that are splitting the atoms into the environment. Could accelerate the healing process and reduce scarring. I wanted to cover that story because it's like we're overdue for something like this, right? Every time I get an owie, it's like, I need that. And this week I got a lot of them on my hands and knees from working. But I still got a ways to go, I noticed. I'm still not fully recovered from the surgery. I'm pushing myself a little too hard too soon. I can feel it in my body, eh? It's been a really rough week on my body. But we beat the shit out of the nuclear industry 5 days this week, so I'm pretty happy. Balances itself out anyway in my books. France carried out 41 atmospheric nuclear weapons tests and are claiming that there's just a slight increase in cancer. But like in the French Polynesian Islands, it was more nuclear tests than that, and it was carried out over 2 decades, so continuous radioactive fallout. There's a lot of small tests that they're not putting into this equation too. And they were testing out chemical and biological weapons at the same time. And the French Polynesians were the guinea pigs, and there's over 7 administrations that have refused to acknowledge that radiation had any adverse effects whatsoever. In fact, they were trying to claim that it had benefits. Had a dream that Grossi hung himself after watching one of Dana's episodes. That's a fantastic dream, by the way. Way to go, James. Over the top, buddy. They're shooting at you. They'll be shooting. They'll be chasing you soon. You keep that up. Take some heat off my fucking ass for a change. That'd be pretty cool. France carried out 41 atmospheric nuclear weapons tests in the French Polynesians, but there was no adverse effects from radioactive fallout, according to this particular professor. We've come across a lot of people like that. And so he talked about a 0.6 to 7.7% of thyroid cancers were caused by fallout and the rest wasn't. Well, so he's trying to peg you down to only thyroid cancer only. Now, in order to get thyroid cancer, you have to saturate the thyroid gland. And now you're producing radioactive hormones for a long period before cancer is going to show up. Cancer is basically created by white blood cells trying to encapsulate radiation, because radiation is pulsing energy every second, wrecking chromosomes and DNA and everything in the cells. So your body needs to contain it. It might take decades to contain it. It contains it by building a tumor around it with the white blood cells. And then that could metastasize and show up everywhere else, right? So what this particular, we'll call him an academic, because that's actually a bad word these days. The lead author, Florent, I'm not going to try to butcher his name. He's in the center paragraph there. The study's lead author is magically only acknowledging thyroid. This is what they've done after a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them done after Chernobyl. And we've done like 2-hour presentations with just academic studies talking about Chernobyl and all the different facets that they studied. And thyroid cancers was just a fraction of it. But the radiation gamma in particular they're talking about going into the thyroids can't exist without betas and alphas and neutrons. And they pulse energy at almost at the speed of light. And they hit each other, they change direction. And that's known as a Braken effect, a Bremsstrahlung German word effect. And that causes whole body x-rays. So when it's in the forest and stuff like that, like we're talking about why are the forest fires so vicious, is because we have killed a bacteria in the ground from radioactive fallout, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. This big pulse of Fukushima was the extreme catalyst for this phenomenon. And we knew this after Chernobyl, for instance, how it works. It kills the bacteria, the fungus. You can't have an ecosystem without bacteria and fungus. So now you have nothing to break down the foliage or the litter. So when you get lightning strikes, all of a sudden, this foliage and litter that didn't break down because it's so dry, it lofts up in the air. You get these great big chunks now lofting up in the air that should be heavy and should be breaking down and rotting through natural decay with the ecosystem, right? So the water doesn't soak up into the forest no more. It runs off the forest. And everything on the west side of the Cascades will run to the Atlantic, and everything on the east side will run towards, or the Pacific, and everything on the east side of the Cascade, the Rocky Mountains, say on the west coast, where the forest fires are to, will run to the Atlantic. And, you know, after Fukushima on the coastlines of California, for instance, the runoff from the rain disposition fallout, which was with rain, it doesn't need rain, but with rain, a lot of it would wash down to the coastlines where they're finding 40 million becquerels a kilogram in the seaweed, for instance, of the iodine 131. And for every 131, there's 10 times more 132 produced, and 30 times more 133 produced, 31 times more iodine 129 produced, and that the 132 and 133 are 9 times more effective ionizing the radiated thyroid gland than the really, really effective 131 iodine is, which wasn't acknowledged. And yeah, it's got a half-life of a couple of days, but it's got 10 half-lives. So that's more than enough to make it and cover the entire continent and the Atlantic included, right? And so that devastated the insects, the birds, the mammals, the animals, and everything else. The study compared 395 people in the French Polynesian Islands who were diagnosed with just thyroid cancer. So they should have been looking for autism and diabetes and Down syndrome and Alzheimer's, dementia, and heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid. And thyroids, are saturated. That's why you got cancer. But the radioactive hormones are also being stored in the pituitary gland, right in the center of your brain, which is an unbelievably important function of the body, and it stores the hormones, right? So you got these radioactive hormones that are being distributed constantly out through your body because your thyroid gland is now saturated. And when you see this with insects and birds, and then they don't reproduce, the ones that survive it are sterile. And that happens in increments over a couple of years, and they're sterile, they stop reproducing, there's less females, more males in the sex ratio studies. So eventually what happens? Well, there's no more females and the species disappear. That's what we're seeing. Yeah, I gotta stop reading the comments because I won't get anything done. Using the documents, meteorological, let me try this again. look, they only acknowledge cancer. And when you see cancer as, oh, and you see this over and over and over. Every time you see the word cancer, just like, it upsets me. And they estimate dose in the thyroid of the participants. It's a completely dishonest, disingenuous, right? You know, how can you have a future when they're the people they're putting on a pedestal and they're just going to perpetrate the exact same lies that we've been listening to for 80 years? And they're doing it so they can get a good job at some disgusting university and pretend to their friends and families that they're special when they're actually just your typical mass murdering monster. Modified theory on gravity eliminates the need for dark energy. Again, this is another Einstein, I believe. Yeah. Not believe, but... So, like, I know this is not nuclear per se, but it's shocking how big the community is that studies these types of subjects. It's shocking. And it's shocking, too, how much traction they actually get. And they're not really contributing anything to society. They're actually like they're a waste of a human. Because they can change the world in so many ways because they're very intelligent people, incredibly intelligent people. But a vast majority of these particular people, their parents worked for the nuclear industry and got them these cushy jobs at NASA and places like this, universities. And they don't got to do anything. They got a whole bunch of students who steer into space and then they'll take the credit. It's completely dishonest. And then they'll ninny, like they're still, like we see this all the time over the years, right, where they'll come out and challenge, which is appropriate, I'll add, they'll come out and challenge Einstein's theories. But, right, they live in this fantasy world and they're wasting this one opportunity they have on this planet to have a legacy and pretending the space has some relevance in the future of their children is irresponsible, to say the least. Scientists achieve 100 million degrees Kelvin with new compact fusion reactors. Again, my goodness, fusion is getting so much traction, but they want investors, and the government can only give them so much, so they need to get private investors. And a lot of it's a write-off for the billionaires to invest in these, and some prestige for themselves, so to speak, right? To fit into these communities. But again, you're wasting all this talent when we have so many important things that we need it resolved. We have so many pressing issues, and we tie up tens of thousands per country of academics of high caliber in these wasted resources that can only be used for deviant things in the future. And so they're not a benefit to humanity. We got to come up with solutions. We got no time left. We got no time. And the biggest issue was the nuclear industry. Saudi Arabia won't rule out building nuclear weapons. Well, like we talked about this when they announced they were going to build their first nuclear power plant. Right, the autocratic monarchy, which is a very destructive governance type of system that they have down there, has its eye on a nuclear arsenal. Of course it does. We knew that right from the beginning. Politically, it would be completely unacceptable to have Iran with the nuclear capabilities, not the kingdom. There you have it. Doesn't get any more blunt than that, does it? That's all I got for everybody until Sunday, unless you have a major earthquake in Japan over the next couple of days. We got bad weather here, which drives me nuts. And I got a lot of projects that I got to try to figure out how to get done. I don't have the energy the last couple of days, but I'm trying, right? But I'm doing the best I can. And so I'll just keep that pace, and hopefully I'll accomplish a few things over the next couple of days. The weather's going to be crap, but it's hard because spring is still here. We still haven't got summer. We'll get there. We're getting there. It's just we're a little behind schedule because we're on the East Coast. We're out in the Atlantic Ocean. We'll come and close the poll down, I guess, before we do anything else. Should the nuclear industry stop claiming Fukushima tanks contain all the water used on the meltdowns? Got 100%? 100%? 44 votes. Outstanding. We're a little shy tonight. We're 20 minutes shy of a typical show. So I might do a shout out maybe. Kill a few more minutes. I don't want the nuclear industry that are monitoring us to go home with low hours. There's a lot of them too. Well, the problem is you got no one to pick on, right? I'm going to close the poll down. That was great. Let's do a shout out. We got Vastinker, Colette. We got James Lucid. Great comments tonight, James. Kicking ass. Dana Nasana, our moderator and a good friend. Thank you, Dana. And P. Hodge. I can't pronounce your last name. My apologies. John Shiflett. I like that comment. Had a dream that Grousey hung himself after watching one of my episodes. That's an epic comment, man. That's so awesome. Tweak. Albert. I don't like thorium, Tweak. Don't like anything to do with nuclear or chain reaction. I despise it. And I can, if a person is honest, I can make them despise it too. Thanks for everybody. Everybody have a great night, great weekend. We'll see everybody. I know Stephen Young is out there somewhere. PBS lover. I'm just going up through the comments. We'll come to the most recent comments in a minute. John Curtis. Katja. Nabi. Albert, Richard, I think I already called out. Thank you, Katja. You're very kind. I hear you. I'm getting there. Jaffas, Jafas. Don Vincent. We're almost through it. Yeah, Stephen Young was here earlier. Good night, Stephen. Have a great night. Great weekend, my friend. It's hard for Stephen even to type in hello, folks. So, Joe Mello, Vitra. Did I get everybody? We'll come to the most recent comments in a moment. There we go. Let's go down to the most recent. Yeah. Yeah, we got everybody. good. Looks good. Okay, folks, we'll see everybody on Sunday show. Sunday shows are always fire. You have a great night, a great weekend. Hugs for everybody. We'll see you. Hopefully there's no big news over the next couple of days, and then we'll see you for a regular show. Take care. Okay, good night, everybody. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you make it this far. Take care now.